President Vladimir Putin, in his contact with American and Israeli representatives, and when he recently received the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi in St. Petersburg, emphasized that we could play a constructive role if both sides were interested in this. Iran, like any other member state of the Treaty on the Non-proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, has a right to enrich uranium for peaceful energy purposes. Clearly, we can exert no influence other than moral pressure on those who resort to colonial and neo-colonial methods and attempt to exploit others.
Russia's top diplomat is now backing Iran's right to enrich uranium under the NPT and, between the lines, daring Trump to try and stop a program Moscow insists is legally protected. As Trump openly toys with the idea of yet another round of strikes, Moscow is issuing a chilling warning that it will not quietly accept any move that tramples Iran's treaty-based nuclear rights. Just as Trump threatens to attack, Sergey Lavrov drops his own diplomatic bomb on America, saying Russia can play a constructive role but will not support pressure that treats Iran as a colony. By denouncing colonial and neo-colonial methods, Moscow is drawing a line in the sand, warning that Western attempts to force Iran's hand through threats and coercion will only harden Russia's stance. And with Putin about to meet Xi, his foreign minister is already flexing a diplomatic shield for Iran, signaling that any new US move on Tehran will now play into a bigger Russia-China front.
I have read reports that correspondence is taking place between the U.S. and Iran via Pakistani mediators or other channels. I cannot confirm whether this information is accurate. We have not received any proposals. We are not attempting to interfere in the negotiation process. We wish the process every success. President Vladimir Putin, in his contact with American and Israeli representatives, and when he recently received the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi in St. Petersburg, emphasized that we could play a constructive role if both sides were interested in this. This is just as our position proved decisive in ensuring the success of the 2015 agreement on resolving the situation surrounding Iran's nuclear program. At that time, we played a decisive role in determining the measures that would resolve the issue of the remaining highly and generally enriched uranium in Iran. We are ready to do so again. Moreover, judging by the information we receive, the nuclear settlement aspect is coming to the fore again. Our position on this matter is very straightforward. Iran, like any other member state of the Treaty on the Non-proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, NPT, has a right to enrich uranium for peaceful energy purposes. However, the extent to which this right can be exercised, the extent to which it will be restricted, and the additional guarantees required to ensure that the peaceful nuclear program is not diverted to military purposes are subject to specific agreements. This was also the case in 2015, when the UN Security Council adopted a resolution approving a comprehensive action plan to resolve the situation surrounding Iran's nuclear program. I would like to point out that, compared to the traditional measures set out in the IAEA Safeguard Agreement with all NPT member states, this plan provided for additional measures of transparency and monitoring of the Iranian nuclear program. At that time, Iran made significant concessions by agreeing to more intrusive IAEA inspections. Our position remains the same as it was when that document was agreed. It is that we will support any solutions that the negotiating parties, in this case the U.S. and Iran, are willing to agree to and accept. If the Islamic Republic decides voluntarily, as a gesture of goodwill, to restrict certain aspects of its entirely legitimate nuclear energy program, and if this helps to achieve a sustainable, long-term peace, we will, of course, like all other adequate countries, welcome this. But let me repeat once again, the criterion is Iran's legitimate right to enrich uranium for peaceful nuclear energy purposes under IAEA supervision. This is an absolutely indispensable part of any decision. As for the Bushehr nuclear power plant, this facility has never been subject to any sanctions. It was excluded from the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, and this concerns no one but Russia and Iran. Clearly, we can exert no influence other than moral pressure on those who resort to colonial and neo-colonial methods and attempt to exploit others. However, the moral and political stance of countries that do not condone such practices is set out very clearly in the relevant resolutions. I would mention that colonial and neo-colonial habits are characterized by a desire to live at the expense of others. And these sanctions, which have now literally flooded all documents on foreign policy decisions of both the European Union and the United States, are, first and foremost, a tool that will allow them to continue living at the expense of others, a tool of unfair competition that violates and undermines all those criteria and principles of globalization which, for many decades, were promoted primarily by the U.S. itself, as it shaped the global economic, trade and investment landscape primarily to suit its own interests. As soon as, on this playing field, by their own rules and criteria, they began to suffer defeat in fair competition, they had resorted to such measures before, but at this stage an unprecedented number of illegal unilateral restrictions appeared in the United States' practical arsenal of measures. I haven't heard anyone from Eurovision comment on anything to do with Russia recently. As it happens, we are already being mentioned within the European Union, where people are saying, well, we'll have to think about whether to talk to Russia or not. Contemporary musicians are also saying things like, we'll think about whether to invite Russia. I want to make it clear straight away that we will not accept the current criteria for Eurovision participants, which are, truthfully, satanic. We will not accept them. That is why we feel perfectly at home within organizations such as BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which, in addition to addressing political, security, trade, economic and investment issues, also promote cultural, humanitarian and educational ties. This applies to both musical and sporting events. There are an increasing number of initiatives, including those under the BRICS framework, which aim to organize relevant events that celebrate traditional values, cultural heritage, and the musical and other traditions of the BRICS nations. These initiatives seek to preserve and promote the art that has developed in these regions over centuries. And Intervision was born precisely in the context of this very association of countries with traditional arts, the countries that make up the BRICS group. Following the first Intervision, which took place last September in Moscow, our Saudi colleagues announced that they are inviting the next competition to be held in their country in 2026. The dates have not yet been set, and I very much hope that the consequences of the aggression unleashed in the Gulf by the Americans together with Israel will not affect the plans to hold the second stage of this competition this year. Special attention in the bilateral agenda was given to the need to make additional efforts to enhance trade and economic cooperation. Among the promising areas mentioned were the oil and gas industry, geological exploration, electricity generation, fishing, and the nuclear sector, including the construction of floating nuclear power plants of small capacities. The minister and his team during their stay in Moscow will have appropriate consultations and negotiations with the Rosatom leadership. There are good prospects in terms of the economy, and we agreed to work on various mutually beneficial projects with the participation of such Russian companies as Gazprom Neft Power Machines, Rushydro. There is also a good opportunity to resume the Energy Working Group, which was created several years ago but has not met for a long time. We advocate for all the UN principles and charters to be observed not selectively, as our Western colleagues are accustomed to doing, from case to case, depending on what they need today, but for these principles to be respected and observed in their entirety and in connection. We confirmed our firm position in support of Africa's legitimate interests in the United Nations, including taking into account its interests, taking into account the positions of the African Union during the reform of the UN Security Council. It has now emerged that the prospect of development of African countries is hindered by the persistent dependence in the field of economy, investment, trade, monetary and financial policy. These neo-colonial remnants have, in fact, become the impetus of the General Assembly to adopt the resolutions mentioned above on the need to counter any manifestations of colonialism. Of course, we coordinate and agree to continue coordinating our actions in all other bodies of the international community. We discuss regional topics, primarily conflicts on the African continent, including the situation in the Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo, which causes serious concern. There were Security Council decisions. They are not being followed. The situation in the Sahara, in the Sahel region, in other parts of the African continent is as follows. Various terrorist groups associated with Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Boko Haram, and other organizations are raising their heads. Therefore, we believe that the international community should certainly help Africans, but sustainable settlement principles should be agreed upon between the countries of the continent themselves, between political groups, governments, movements. We assign a significant role to regional organizations, including, of course, the African Union. The third Russia-Africa Summit will be held in Moscow this autumn. We very much hope that the Equatorial Guinean president will once again personally participate in this event. My colleague and friend and I also agreed to actively cooperate in implementing the decisions made within the Russia-Africa Partnership Ministerial Forums. We clued up our friends on the state of affairs in Russian-U.S. relations. We are grateful to our colleagues for their balanced and objective position on Ukraine, for refusing to support Russophobic initiatives in the United Nations. We informed them of the latest developments of our foreign policy in the context of achieving the goals of the special military operation. When it comes to the third Russia-African Summit, all member states of the African Union, without exception, have been invited. Leaders of sub-regional organizations and integration bodies across the African continent, as well as the leadership of the African Union itself, have been invited. As in previous years, I have no doubt that the overwhelming majority of states will be represented, hopefully including at the highest level.